Welcome to the podcast, The Next Big Thing. I'm your host, Keith D. Terry, a consultant, a coach, and a serial entrepreneur. The mission here is to teach, inspire, and to motivate. Today, we're going to be tackling how polling is falling short of missing the data. What does the data reveal about the political behaviors of young voters, particularly young Black men? And why should campaigns and posters be paying closer attention to this demographic group, particularly as we head towards the next presidential election? To help us unpack this, I'm honored to be joined today by Dr. Alvin Tillery, the founder and CEO of the 2040 Strategy Group, a consulting firm specializing in political strategy and public opinion research. Dr. Tillery is one of the foremost experts on race and democracy in America, and his work provides a data-driven approach to understanding how diverse groups engage with the political process. Dr. Tillery earned his PhD from Harvard, and he graduated magna cum laude. Dr. Tillery, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Keith.
Let's just start by discussing the data, how it reveals what Black men and why this group remains so challenging and for traditional polls to understand.
Well, yeah. So I don't think the problem is that Black men are a challenging group to capture with traditional polling methods. I don't think they're any more challenging than anyone else who now relies on this as their primary mode of communication, right? So the cell phone dominant user has completely changed the way that we have needed to do political polling for about the last, 10 to 12 years. We've had to really develop some new modes of contacting people, using things like internet panels and to make sure that we're getting people who are what we call cell phone nomads. So this phone that I just held up, I've had for 25 years. I got it when I did my first professorate, not this phone, but this phone number.
I was going to say.
Right. Although I do tend to keep mine longer than I think my kids will want me to. Right. But, the thing is that, I kept the phone number from South Bend, Indiana. My first teaching job was in Notre Dame.
So did I.
My first cell phone. I got it in 1999. And I kept it for many years because my grandmother, who just died of COVID in 2021. Oh, yeah, that's fine. That's in 2021. She always remembered it. So I didn't want to switch that number to something that would be harder for her to keep up with. And so I'm in the 574 area code, but I haven't lived in the 574 area code since 2008. So when I get push polls and surveys from, what's happening in the Indiana Senate race or governor's race, I don't pick those up because I don't live there. I don't care.
Well, what's interesting for me,
that's the dilemma, right?
What's interesting for me is, and the reason I thought it was challenging is it's okay to have demographic data, but racial data, how can you get that from a phone number?
So you wouldn't get it from a phone number, but you would ask people in the interview, like, how do you identify? So the question that we ask is, we say, which of these races do you consider yourself to be? Please list all. Okay. And then people would be listing those. And so the dilemma for getting good data on Black people, and particularly Black men, is not one of, access, but it's one of will, right? And so most of the mainstream polls that we see in the media are just less concerned with what we call oversampling Black and Latino and Asian communities. So many of those polls, first of all, they're way smaller sample sizes than, say, what my firm does. The average poll you would see in ABC News or whatever is going to have, 300 to 500 respondents.
And that's a sample size.
And that's a national sample.
Okay.
We tend to average, 2,000 to 3,000.
Oh, wow.
Because we specialize in something called survey experiments or randomized controlled trials, because the companies and the politicians and the super PACs that want to hire us, they want to test messages.
Okay.
So for each message that you want to test, you need to have between 250 to 350 respondents for each treatment. So we're doing a lot more work than the average media survey. And so what that has meant is that over the last several years, my firm has been more right on average when it comes to, Black voters, Latino voters, young white voters than these media polls. So like we were among the first pollsters in the country to predict that Ossoff and Warnock would actually win those 2 Senate seats in Georgia.
Oh, wow.
Because we ran message tests that showed that the white, middle class, highly educated urban population was gravitating toward them, in part because they were supporting the Black Lives Matter movement in Georgia.
Gotcha.
And nobody else believed that. Like we are the only pollsters that really, except for his internal pollster, that predicted that Brandon Johnson would win the mayor's race in Chicago.
So you guys have been on the cutting edge. And so before we get into this presidential election, let's talk a little bit more so folks understand. Does your firm do anything particularly different to increase the sample size from 1,500 people? Is it all by phone? Let's go into that a little bit more.
Yeah. So we use what we call multimodal approach. So we field a lot on internet panels. Then we do something called census matching. We figure out who's on the panel, and then we match the demographics to, what percentage of the Black population is above 80 and what percent is between, 45 and 65. And then we draw distribution based on that. We also draw distributions based on gender. So we want 52% of the sample to be Black women, 48% to be Black men. We draw on, region. So the panels allow us to specify based in that way. And then we follow up with phone calls if we have gaps. Yeah. So we do phone contacting. We have a call center that we partner with, because we're most interested in what messages help people win. We are much more focused on just treating those messages on the panel than we are. And another problem with the polling industry in general, from my perspective, when you deal with the Black community and the Latino community and the Asian community, is that, you'll see in a lot of these media polls, they're talking about likely voters. Who's a likely voter? Right?
Yes, you're right. You hear that all the time.
Because they think that, history of voting in the past, it is one of the best predictors of future voting.
Yes.
The problem for transporting that model to Black and Latino communities is that 50% of the voting age population in the Black community is under 35 years old.
Okay.
They may not be as regular voters as, in these other communities. It's even higher with the Latino community.
Okay.
So our firm specializes in, we poll much more closely to what the actual demographics of the communities look like than just likely voters who are typically older, they're more middle class, they're more stable. And so if you're trying to understand what's happening with the Black community in this election, a lot of the reason why Biden was getting things wrong and why the Harris campaign was getting things wrong at the beginning of the summer is because they're getting a lot of likely voter polls. Likely Black voters are like you and I. They are going to vote Democrat.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
So that's interesting. As we now dive deep into the folks that are less than 30
mm-hmm.
and Black vote,
it's really the under 40s that you should be thinking about.
Okay. So help us to understand how we should be looking at, how you look at that group, how politicians look at that group, because you believe that they're a key to this election.
They're the margin of victory. I mean, if Harris does not pick up steam with all Black voters under 40, but particularly Black men in the millennial and Gen Z generations, she's likely going to lose, is my perspective.
Wow.
And I think her campaign is making some terrible mistakes by not focusing more on messaging to that community. So,
okay.
For that segment of the community.
And let's go into, since you want to do a deep dive, let's go into why you think that might be happening and how you are able to detect the error.
So I'm able to detect the error because we've been engaged in the cycle. And, we've been trying to give things over to the campaign since early in last fall. And there was this kind of disbelief when my firm was showing them data, like a bunch of other folks were, I'm sure, that, they were running behind with Black voters. Because if you have these kind of likely voter models,
Right.
if the likely voter in the Black community is someone that's been voting, they're probably older than 40, they're in those boomer and Gen X generations, right? Then things look great from there. 85% of that segment of the Black community is going to vote Democratic. That's absolutely true. But you may have heard in the media the concern about Trump curious voters, right, in the Black community, right? And so that Trump curiosity was clustered in people under 40. And so why the Democrats missed that narrative is that the entire get out the vote operation that has historically made the Black community overperform for Democrats in elections, it runs through two types of institutions: churches.
Yeah.
And then it also runs through the 501c3 groups that we've historically always relied on. The NAACP, the Urban League, Reverend Sharpton's group. The under 40 voters in the Black community do not go to church as much.
Fact.
And they do not know nor care very much about those C3 groups. Let me just put a fine point on this for you.
Okay.
You go to X or TikTok or whatever the social media platform of choices for young Black people, and you'll see that the NAACP, maybe they have 700,000 or 1 million followers.
Yes.
How many followers does Sexy Red have? Or, whomever
a lot
else.
more than that.
Megan Thee Stallion, and so like that just shows you the disconnect. Now, Barack Obama has got 100 million followers or whatever, right? But another problem is if you're relying on Barack Obama to mobilize the under 40s, you got to remember they were like, teenagers when he was at the height of his power.
That's true. Very true.
And it's not a mobilizer for that generation in the way that a younger person.
So you're confident. So I guess the question is, you're feeding this into the political campaigns, and you just don't think that they're putting the strategy around what you're suggesting.
No, they have a white voter strategy.
Gotcha.
Right? I mean, let's just be clear. The Democrats, since Bill Clinton, their strategy is shaped by this notion that if you talk about race too much, if you talk too directly about racial inequalities, the white swing voters in the suburbs will vote against you. And this strategy was true in 1992.
But not true today.
It's not true today.
Wow.
Now, don't get me wrong. Like, if I were Kamala Harris or Barack Obama, like, I would probably listen to the very high-priced consultants that they're paying to say, focus on, making yourself look non-threatening and look presentable and,
right.
Black excellence, all those things that, because you can't take any opportunity. You can't give the Republicans any opportunity to demonize you as a Black person, darken your skin, pull a Willie Horton ad out on you. So that's good strategy. But here's the dilemma. Let's take Barack Obama. It doesn't get more, tall and handsome and respectable and the Dr. King voice and all that stuff. And he says all the right things. I'm not just going to be the president of Black America. All those things that he needs to say to get elected. And he got like 45% of the white vote in 2008. He got 95% of the Black vote.
Yeah.
Then he governed those 4 years, totally respectable, in the box, Black man, Black excellence, everything. And in 2012, he even said, the Black Lives Matter folks need to calm down a little bit. All that stuff, right?
Yep.
2012, his white vote share decreased to 38%, right? And so that 38 to 45%, they're the baked in, solidly progressive, liberal whites, college educated. They live in those ring suburbs around Atlanta and, in Chicago and all these places. And that's our ceiling in that community, right? So in order to win, we've elected one Black president. A Black president has to hypermobilize Black and Latino and Asian communities.
So is it possible? I mean, so you're saying right now you're feeling the key to a Harris win is the less than 40 Black male.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And right now, if you took a snapshot of their support, how does it look?
Terrible. I mean, she's running at,
I guess what I'm asking. So, are you suggesting that they're now leaning towards Trump, or they're independent?
No, they're not leaning towards Trump, but like, so there's what we call a gender generation gap. So our latest poll, which we took at the beginning of last month,
Gotcha.
We found that there's no gender gap because let's add to the spicy wrinkle of not only being a Black candidate, but Kamala Harris is a multiracial woman. She's
Yes.
Black, Asian, and a woman. And what we know is that candidates have not historically supported women. This is part of Hillary Clinton's problem.
You're right
in
about
the same way that they support men, wait for it, even women have this kind of irrational bias against women candidates, right?
Okay.
So she needs to run the score up in the Black community and in the Latino community to have any chance of victory.
Gotcha.
And so what I'm saying is the numbers that we pulled off last month, we're going to pull off new ones at the end of this week. It showed that Black boomers and Gen Xers are all up around 85-90% support, male and female, exactly where she needed to be. The ceiling that we found among Gen Xers and millennials, the high was the women. They're about 70 to 73%. So that's too low. That's got to be higher.
Gotcha.
Black men in the millennial category were at percent support, and the Black men in the Gen Z category were at 46. And
now,
so what that means is she's got to go up 30 to 40 points with those demographics to win.
Well, is it possible as we go deeper that Black men are just not engaging with the posters? And because of the non-engagement, the numbers might be skewed a little bit lower than they should be.
No, that's not how. Yeah, it's not possible. Yeah. We because again, we polled 1,500 Black men that matched the census, and that's where those numbers come from. So they're engaging with us, and we've been finding the same result since last October. Now, please don't get me wrong. Harris's numbers are better than Biden's were, right?
Okay, that's
but they're just not. So, but like, what I'm trying to get across to Democratic supporters and to the Black community is that our goal is not to replicate the win set for any previous Democratic president. Our goal is to replicate the win set for the only time in history we've elected a Black president. Because, again, all the things that Harris is doing right, she's still running 2 points behind where Joe Biden was with white women. So, like, and she says abortion every other word out of her mouth.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that, wow, so she's 2 points behind Biden amongst white women?
Yeah. So, yeah, at this time. So, and then when we get to Biden, he actually underperformed where his polls were. In our poll, she's at like 43% with white women.
Okay.
At this time, I think the average was saying that like Biden was probably at like 44-45% with white women in the polling. On election day in 2020, Biden got something like 42 or 43% of white women, and that is problematic because her strategy is geared toward boosting that support, and I don't see evidence that that's working. On the contrary, what I see in the polls, that when we go back to the polls we were doing on Biden in the fall, he was running ahead of her a couple points with white women. Her support with white women has contracted in our polling from where Biden was. Wow. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem for her.
And why do you think that is? Does your polls detect a reason, or just?
Well, yeah, we ran a poll for a group called She the People. It had women of color and white women. It was a sample of 3,000. And white women are just not as excited about having a woman of color president as the women of color are. Latinas are super excited. Black women are super excited. All the kind of, you heard about, oh my gosh, we're winning.
Yes.
You know, the registration numbers are off the charts. Stacey Abrams doing it for us again. Like, that's partially true. What's happening is that the young black women are getting excited and the young Latinas are getting excited. The registered white women voters are no more excited about Kamala Harris than they were about Joe Biden. And so the majority of white women will vote Republican again. And that is going to be a problem for Harris. The gender gap that we always talk about is a women of color gap. You take women of color out of the gender category, and overwhelmingly white women vote Republican, like 57, 58%. Right?
And abortion doesn't matter, or
I think it does. I think she, you know, I think she may be running even farther behind if abortion weren't on the table.
I see.
So, but it has not been the force multiplier for her that her entire campaign strategy is built around. And that scares me.
So let's get into this then. So
Okay.
now I understand a whole lot more what you're suggesting. The key to a Harris win is Black men, Latin men. Does the data suggest that they are living in the so-called swing states of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin? So what are your suggestions there? How they should attack this problem? Because clearly, what I'm hearing you say is that their strategy is more of a majority white strategy than a minority strategy.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, it's the safest play, and I wish it were working better. But yeah, there's probably 750,000 black male voters in just the swing cities of Atlanta, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Raleigh, Detroit that will shape the election. When Obama won, those people registered and came out of the woodwork and stood in line in Georgia for 5 hours for him to win. And so what has to happen, and I don't know that Harris can do that, which is why I've tried to take on some of this work myself through a super PAC effort that I've started. We need directly targeted messaging to black men and young black voters overall about why Donald Trump is scary, why they should be afraid of Donald Trump. So I started this effort called the Alliance for Black Equality. Our first ad went up yesterday, and we're running ads with young black people in them. We went out to the street. We asked them, like, hey, do you know what stop and frisk is? How would you feel if it were a national policing strategy? And they're like, what? Like, which candidate is proposing that? Donald Trump is, right? So part of the problem with how, like, Kamala is not failing on her own to mobilize the black community. The Democratic Party's failing.
Yeah.
Black elites are failing. And so I started this effort. It's a small effort, $250,000 effort, digital ads. Our goal is to reach 1 million black voters in the swing states between now and Election Day.
Wow.
We put the ad up on YouTube a few hours ago. We're already at 15,000, 10 or 10,000, something like that. Okay. Right. And so we're trying to hit them by pointing out, how bad Trump's economic record was, how he's the source of all these DEI bans, how he's the source of, the crises that we have around black maternal health. And so the thing is, Keith, my firm, the 2040 Strategy Group, we did all these message tests last fall, and we tried to give them to the Democratic Party. And they were like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. Oh, we like that maternal health thing. That fits with something we already wanted to do. But we got this. Fund the police and abortion and we're good. And we're like, okay, y'all gonna be in that find out phase.
Okay.
But the find out phase for me is unacceptable because I'm raising these two little beautiful black children.
Right.
And I don't want them to live in a society that looks like the one that I grew up in the 1970s.
Gotcha.
Or worse.
So these, so are you sure? Well, I guess here's the question, because I'm torn now, because I always thought that when I looked at the demographics, when people can vote between 20 and 30, I mean, of course they can vote at 18 and other things like that, but the 20 to 30s act different than the 30 to 40 group, don't they?
They do. Well, yes and no. I mean, millennials are not getting more conservative as they age. They're the first generation to, that we've observed that in the polling. And so the corporatist conservative messages that Kamala and Biden and Obama, they don't land on anyone under 40, because the under 40s want something radically different.
So let me ask you, wouldn't Barack have this same problem if he were running now? Because what you just suggested is that the less than 40 are disengaged, but you're suggesting that they're disengaged because the messaging isn't hitting home with them.
Yeah,
that's what you're suggesting.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, he would, but he's also a man. So I think he might, because let's just be honest, Kamala's running a fantastic campaign.
Yeah, she's going to piss a whole bunch of women off with that statement, but it's the truth.
She's way better. She's a way better candidate than any of us imagined.
Yes.
See, on the debate stage, she's better than Barack Obama by a lot, in my view. I still remember him getting his clock cleaned by Mitt Romney in 2012.
He did. People forget that.
So, she's a fantastic candidate, but we cannot let our belief, because we in the middle and the upper classes, the AKAs and the alphas and, the black HBCU crowd, we're all in on her.
Got to mention the Kappas too.
That's not the Kappas too. That's not the segment that we have to worry about. Y'all already gonna vote.
Yeah.
Right. So who's talking to the people that are not mobilized already? And the Democrats have fumbled the ball because their policies are too far to the right for these under 40s. And then unlike the Republicans, they don't run segmented advertising. They're not like,
well, that's interesting, because, on one hand, I was going to ask you, could it be that black men are angry with her because of the so-called sending them to jail because of marijuana? There was, you've heard it, right?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. No, I've heard that. I think it's nonsense. I don't think that most voters are even aware of that legacy. What I do know, and my tests bear this out, in order to capture white voters that align Republican, the so-called Nikki Haley voter, her strategy has been to lean into, I'm a prosecutor. Our polls show that this makes all black people under 40 and a lot of young white people under 40 go in this direction. They do not like that messaging. It is not mobilizing for them. Now, she has to pick her poison. Reach for the Nikki Haley voters, which the Democratic Party and everyone believes is the secret sauce, even though we know it's not the secret sauce from when we elected Barack Obama and Joe Biden.
Gotcha.
Keep reaching for them, and that's what she's choosing to do. Right?
So what do you recommend that the Democratic Party do, or those folks that want to support Kamala Harris do?
Well, it's great that they're funding super PACs, right? They're funding super PACs, and some of them are great, like Black Voters Matter, and not they're doing all the door knocking. But why I started my digital ads effort with the Alliance for Black Equality, and we're going to have 5 ads up over the next month, is because, those door knocks are often very imprecise. So yeah, they are. Because it's not clear that you're going to get the voter in that black household. That's the swing voter.
I see. Okay.
Or the young black. What if the young black man's mom answered, yes, I'm going to vote for Kamala? Okay. You've not talked to the person. So we're hitting them on their phones when they go to play on Twitch or watch YouTube they're going to get our message
Because
there.
the data does suggest that the less than 40 use their phones a whole lot differently than folks that are older than that.
Right. So the Democratic Party's probably going to burn $300 million on television ads that the people that they most need to persuade are not going to watch.
Because they're not watching television.
Not watching television. Yeah, not watching television. So, and she could counter the prosecutor by saying, okay, maybe that was true, but Donald Trump wants to allow every cop in America to frisk you with no reasonable suspicion. Donald Trump wants to make it impossible for your local police department to settle with a black family. If they kill someone, there will be no more consent decrees, no more police reform. That's what she needs to be talking about, but it cuts against her I'm a prosecutor message.
And so what you're also suggesting, I want to infer this correctly, that those folks that are less than 40, black men, Latin men, are not necessarily leaning towards Trump. They're leaning towards not participating in the voting process.
Yeah, the real swing is the couch or Harris.
Oh,
now,
wow.
There is a kind of 8 to 9% that is interested in Trump, and they may vote for him. But that's kind of a secular trend with black men. I mean, and we also have to reframe how we talk about this. First of all, the vast majority of black men overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. So when Stacey Abrams lost in Georgia, for example, black men didn't turn. 83% of black men voted for her. 87% of black women did. That's a crazy high number.
It is.
Right? Now, you got to understand, what's behind that 7%. Some are just constitutionally more conservative, and they're interested in the kind of strongman figure that Trump pretends to be. And that's part of it,
So do you believe this is going to be a low voter turnout?
I don't. I think it's going to be a high voter turnout overall, but it could be low turnover vote out for black under 40s.
Because when I go back to when Hillary was running against Trump, some of the national polls got that way wrong. And I went to the University of Chicago and I was listening to a poster and some of the post data, and they suggested that the Republican levels stayed the same. It's just that the Democratic support was significantly lower than it was. Are we seeing that happen again here?
Possibly. So I think what happened in 2016 is that, first of all, the polls were not that wrong. The average polls said that Hillary would win the national popular vote by, anywhere from 1.5 to 2.8%, and that's exactly what happened. The problem was that we didn't have good swing state polling, right? Swing states broke largely because of third-party candidates and Russian mischief in the direction of Mr. Trump, right?
Yeah.
And so what people need to take away from this call is the average of the polls in the betting markets had Hillary up nationally by about 5 to 6 points.
They did.
And that's great. And that's about where it finished. Kamala's about half that in the national advantage. She's at 2.8% now. And so, and the swing state polls are favoring Mr. Trump more. Now, that could be because we're not contacting people the right way. But if I'm a black candidate and a black woman candidate, I want to see my lead nationally up around where Hillary's was in 2016. And then I'm going to bombard the swing states by supporting efforts like mine or mailers or, and we just don't see that happening.
So
right now,
what should happen? Let's talk, because I don't want to run out of time here.
Yeah, sure.
So what are your prescriptions for going forward?
What should happen now is that if you're a black person that's concerned that Donald Trump represents the return to Jim Crow, right? He's going to deport those Haitians. He's going to end the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He's going to overturn the Civil Rights Act. He's going to, implement national stop and frisk. If you're worried about these things, what you need to do right now is get to one of these low propensity young black voters and tell them directly what you think the dangers are, right? That's the first thing you need to do. Second thing you need to do is keep giving your $25 or whatever you're giving to Kamala. She needs it, but also invest in the efforts of those 501c3s, the NAACP. Invest in their door knocking, right? And then invest in operations like Black Voters Matter and my operation, Alliance for Black Equality, that are going to like hit people with targeted ads, because Black people are not, the Black community is not playing politics. If you want to know why we're losing the multiracial democracy that we built, Black people built in the 1960s, it's because we still think that democracy is decided by our energy, going to the polls, volunteering, and our yard signs. It's decided by who has the money to put up digital ads and to run contacting. And so we're the only area where we underperform in the political process as Black people is in donations, right? Meanwhile, the Republicans, Elon Musk can cut a check for $20 million to run AI-generated ads and robocalls for Donald Trump. So we've got to get into that game. We've got to tap these young influencers and convince them, like when I look at, the tweets of someone like a Wiz Khalifa, who's like, oh, I'm supporting Trump and I want universal child care and education. And Trump doesn't want those things. A lot of the influencers are as uninformed, right? I look at like someone like
more.
or more.
Yeah.
Right? We've got to stop looking at them as leading the way, and we've got to tell them what the message needs to be so they can get on the same page with us.
Which is a good thing for Kamala to get Taylor Swift.
Great thing. And Megan Thee Stallion was first.
So before we run out of time, I want to understand. So in your opinion, I want to ask you what states you think she's going to win. But before we get there, what are the swing states in your opinion? Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, anything else?
Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina. Those are the ones that we've got to focus on, where Black population's concentrated. Arizona's also, Nevada, those are in play.
And so you think Arizona could possibly swing blue?
Well, it did the last time because of overwhelming support from the Latino community.
Gotcha. And in Michigan. Okay. So if this doesn't happen, you think that there's going to be a Republican victory. And it's not because Trump is winning, it's that they're decided to stay on the couch.
That's right.
Wow, that's a little scary, Doc.
It should be. I hope it is. And we got 30 days, 32 days.
And, because here are some facts that I've, in my research here, and as a podcaster, I know that people under 40 are not watching television as much as they used to. I know that people are streaming a whole lot more and everything is online in some digital format. And so my question to you now is, you figured this out, and of the social media platforms, is there one that you think is superior in reaching this demographic that you want? Is it YouTube? Is it Facebook? Is it Is it Instagram? What do you say?
The most important platforms are YouTube, because you can be up on streaming and web and all of their affiliates for very low cost. Right. And then Facebook and TikTok. TikTok does not allow political ads, so you got to cut them down and get some virality there. Those are the big three. X is kind of cratered because Musk has revealed himself as an operative of the right wing movements. So, like my effort, that $250,000 effort that I am talking about, we're going to reach between 500,000 and 1 million voters over the next month with just that $250,000 investment. Now, if we could get that up to 1 million, we could reach them like 7-10 times a day.
What do you need to do that?
Probably $750,000 to $1 million, right? To reach them 7-10 times a day. We could also mail a postcard with a QR code where they could get the videos that way in the house. But we're going to touch every Black household in the swing states at least once.
And all
think about how affordable that is.
Yeah.
Right? Right? It's a much better investment than television.
It really is. Well done. And I know we're going to run out of time because you have a hard stop. If people want to follow you, do you have any suggestions of where they go? Should they go to your PAC or should they go to 2040 Strategy Group?
Right now, because we're trying to win this election, I'm, to allianceforblackequality.org. And if you follow me on X, I'm tweeting about that all the time. It's just Alvin B. Tillery Jr.
Okay. And last question for you. Based on if nothing happens, what's the outcome of the election?
Donald Trump wins. And that's
Wow.
bad for us.
Wow.
Because it will be an emboldened Donald Trump with no guardrails, because his buddies on the Supreme Court said he's immune. Listen, yesterday the man announced that he is going to rescind the legal status of those poor Haitian folks
in Springfield,
Ohio. Now, if you're a Black American, my family's been in America since 1720. Now, if you are like me and you're listening to that and you don't believe that that's a test run for what he wants to do to all Black people, you need to wake up. You need to wake up. Right?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Tillery, for coming on. Thanks for listening to The Next Big Thing. I'm your host, Keith D. Terry. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support this podcast, please share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and a review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on my YouTube channel at Keith D. Terry. If you want to recommend a guest, please email me at info@terryperformancegroup.com. This has been produced by your host and Jade Productions.